I'm delighted to be joined by someone who I disagree with on many, many things, but who I respect highly, and also has an uncanny ability to cogently and very persuasively and seductively argue his case. I speak, of course, of Owen Jones, the Guardian columnist and author. Owen, really, really good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in and giving up some time on your Sunday. I wanted to get you in on a big, big topic.
What an honour, honestly. And right back at you. I'm a big fan of yours. It's true, we don't necessarily agree on everything, let's be honest.
That's true, but I think, Owen, it's fair to say we both care about the future of our country.
Yes,
and we're trying to find some common ground as well. So look, we're streaming live on YouTube and Global Player for this conversation for the next hour. I'm going to be asking you this question right from the start. Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? 0345 6060 973. You can also text 84850. Tony Blair, with his piece in The Observer today, the future demands a radical response. He says this: the debate is not about Labour's mission, but how to achieve it in a fast-changing world. My essay has provoked what has been, on the whole, good and healthy debate. It isn't about the why of the progressive political mission. It's basically about the how. He talks about higher growth creating opportunity, better public services and especially education, lower energy costs, improved living standards and affordability, lower taxes also, especially for the lower paid. Andy Burnham's got a completely different prescription there, much more interventionist, also around tax, public ownership and other things. Owen, when we hear a three-time electoral success in Tony Blair, arguably the most successful Labour politician in its history, we've got to take him seriously, haven't we?
I think if Harold Wilson hadn't have died back in 1995 and he was still popping around in the 2000s lecturing Labour on his electoral formula on the basis he'd won 4 elections, I think people would have found that absolutely ludicrous. I think they would have found it ridiculous. I think they would have said that was a completely different era, a completely different time, and you can't transplant your political model from that era into a totally different political universe. I mean, what Blairism did was rely on an economic model that was geared towards the City of London, and that pact, that kind of Faustian pact, if you like, was we'll take the tax revenues and we'll invest them in public services. That economic model collapsed in 2008, the financial crash, and it never recovered. And the problem is, Blairites, or whatever you want to call that whole wing of the Labour Party, never came up with a different model. And that's their basic existential problem. I agree with him when he says this government is directionless and doesn't have a national mission. But I think that isn't specific to Keir Starmer. I'm letting him off the hook, maybe. I think that's the whole wing of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has actually taken on several of Blair's staffers in Number 10. I mean, he basically did everything that whole wing of the Labour Party asked him to do. And, it's a combination of that economic model which, after the crash, stopped providing sustained increases and improvements to living standards, to security and to public services. And that's what's caused the turmoil in this country. People feel angry at the system, and that goes off in different directions. For some, it might be Brexit. For some, now it might be the Green Party. It might be Scottish nationalism for others. But the point is, that economic model, which, unfortunately, what, again, Tony Blair took... He said when Margaret Thatcher died, he said he saw his role as to build on what she did. Yeah. He kept that model and tried to basically soften the edges with public spending from those tax revenues. But that's not an economic model that unfortunately works. And actually, if you look at economic growth, you spoke about economic growth, and we all agree you need economic growth. Then to take the proceeds of that and invest in people and communities and services. If you look from the Thatcherism onwards, economic growth has just been going down and it's been less equitably distributed. In the 70s, which is demonised this hellhole and the country falling apart, we had economic growth, higher economic growth in the 70s on average than we did in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s and the 2020s. So, I don't buy this idea that, let the market rip. I mean, his whole proposals are get rid of real terms increases to the minimum wage, get rid of weaken net zero commitments, deregulation, welfare cuts. I mean, he sounds like Liz Truss in 2022.
Well, certainly Kemi Badenoch could sign up to most of those things. But isn't it a case, Owen, that it's not that he probably doesn't want to focus on net zero in the longer term, but what he's saying is that you've got an issue right now of high energy costs that are holding back the economy. And he's saying if the central mantra of the entire Labour government was growth, then some of the measures that they've been taking on workers' rights and on increases in the minimum wage and all of these things don't help the growth agenda.
Well, I mean, if you take clean energy, which, he says, this choice between clean energy or cheap energy.
Yes.
But for new electricity generation, renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels in this country. I mean, it's based on completely out-of-date, factually wrong assumptions about renewable energy.
Power. You still need baseload power as well, Owen. And you look at Norway, for example, and how they're doing, and you look at the way the economy's flatlining at the moment. I mean, our growth is paltry. I'm not saying it's just down to the Labour government. I mean, it's been paltry for the last 15 years, to be fair.
Norway's quite a good example, because what they did, of course, when they struck oil, is they invested it in a
sovereign wealth fund.
In a sovereign wealth fund, where we just frittered it away on tax cuts in the 1980s, which has obviously left us another example of our economic model being broke. No, the problem in our economy, we've got a low-wage economy.
Yes.
We've gone through the longest squeeze in wages in this country since the Napoleonic age. And what that does is two things. It sucks demand out of the economy, not least in communities where industries were ripped out in the 80s, the heart of those communities ripped away. But it also means that the taxpayer has to step in with in-work benefits to top up those wages. We need to change the economic model so that people have more money in their pockets, because when poorer people get money in their pockets, they go and spend it. When richer people have extra money, they tend to save it. They put it, if they're very rich, in offshore accounts. That's not good for the economy at all. The problem in this economy is we've got a low productivity economy.
We do. I agree with you there.
We've got a productivity crisis. We've got massive regional inequalities in this country.
London-centric.
Very London-centric. Yep. So the infrastructure and all the rest of it focused there. If you go to much of the country, like I'm from Stockport, if you go to much of this country, it's comparable to Eastern Europe in terms of people's living standards and the level of infrastructure. I mean, Poland is projected, actually, in a few years, it could even surpass Britain. But the point I'm making is, these are all problems which both Labour under Tony Blair and the Conservatives and Keir Starmer aren't addressing. Okay. It's an economic model which is based on share buybacks and dividends. We call it financialisation instead of investment.
Well, it's interesting you mention that, because this is where I think the real departure comes between Tony Blair and Andy Burnham, because Andy Burnham's given his own riposte. He actually wrote back in the Times and hit back at Tony Blair, and was basically talking about the fact that Tony Blair hasn't really understood the central problem of inequality in his argument, the falling living standards of millions. And he comes out with a very different prescription, as you know, Owen, which is really around more devolution. He's talking about much more intervention by the state, more public ownership, and actually even talking about tax reform like land value taxes or a universal tax on death duties to fund social care. Do you think that the Burnham model is the right model, not only for the Labour Party, but for the country's future?
Well, I don't yet know what Burnhamism is, and he has, alas, U-turned on some of the commitments he's previously made.
What's he U-turned on now?
Well, I mean, he U-turned on what, taxes? I think it will. I mean, what the sort of tax commitments he was going to make in terms of the fiscal rules that he was going to stick by.
That's true. He has already done that, but that's because he said, "I don't want to be in hot with to the bond markets," and then realised he had to be.
Well, yeah, because he made a stupid comment really about a couple of years ago about the bond markets, which he didn't need to say, and that puts extra pressure on him. He's talks about the bond markets the way you just said. You need a strategy for the bond markets. No one can pretend otherwise. I think what is right, what he said there, is Britain is one of the most centralised Western countries. It remains one of the most centralised Western countries. And, even though we've had devolution to a degree in in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and various mayoralties, it still remains more centralised than most European
Centralised
countries.
Around London and the financial sector. Is that the main thing?
Yes, of course, yeah. I mean, it's geared around the financial sector and the needs of the economy in London, the South East. By the way, I say that. I mean, look, London's got some of the worst poverty in the country.
Yes.
Borough, you get Islington stereotyped as this champagne socialist, land. 40% plus kids grow up in poverty, but nonetheless, it works very well for people who are very well off in London, the South East, and it doesn't work very well for most other people. So we need to obviously have that kind of devolution. But and I think, what he has been talking about and what we need to talk about more are how we tax wealth rather than income, which is at the moment the debate that I think we should be having. And that's good for the economy, because the problem is we have an economy based on asset bubbles. We have, I don't know if you've ever spoken to Gary Stevenson, the former...
Yeah, I follow him very closely.
Well, he's a former City banker, and he made his money by betting that inequality and wealth inequality in British society...
He's talking about taxing wealth.
Exactly, because the problem is, if you don't tax that wealth, then it ends up that the collective wealth in our society gets sucked into property portfolios and so on, and that's not good for the real economy. So, I mean, talking about land value tax, that's something which the Labour Party originally started speaking about when it was first founded. Because we have at the moment council taxes, which was based on valuations of the early 90s, which are regressive. I mean, they hammer poorer people. They don't in any way account for how things have changed since the 1990s. So I think what we need to talk about is how we make the tax system more progressive, how we tax wealth more than income, and how we move away from a financialised system, because that I think is holding the economy back.
I mean, look, my own view is that the city is one of the great jewels in the crown of this country, and we talked about it a few weeks ago on the show. But we'll come back to all of this. Owen, you've got us on.
Ali, hi, Owen. So the point I'd like to start with is that everybody seems to forget that Andy Burnham was a Blairite cabinet minister, and he was also the centrist candidate among three other poorly performing candidates in the 2015 leadership election. Now, the starting point for Burnham really is actually one on delivery, and we've been really short on this as a country over the past decade and a half. So the projects he's managed to get off the ground in Manchester are certainly transformative at a local level. Now, the question is whether he has the ability to scale that up. I don't think rehashed Blairism is necessarily going to be good on all fronts anyway. Yes, you want economic dynamism and probably, wholesale taxation reform, and that needs to be started from the ground up. I don't think we can use the model of the 90s and 2000s. But also, the other thing to touch upon with Mr. Blair is foreign adventurism, and what the attitude is to that. And that hasn't really been interrogated all that much. And I think if we really want to see flesh on the bone in the Labour leadership discussion, it will boil down not just to the economics, but also to things around our attitude to the European Union and the level of integration that we want to have with it, as well as attitudes to foreign conflict, because that has really risen.
Understood, Milo, but just to be clear on Burnham, where are you on Burnham? Are you basically saying that the jury's out, we're going to have to wait and see whether he can implement what he did in Manchester more broadly?
I think the jury is still very much out, because his political journey is actually from the Blairite wing of the party.
Owen, you wrote a piece just a couple of weeks ago, after the painful ruse of Starmerism, the left should be cautious about Andy Burnham.
Yes, well, I mean, Keir Starmer stood on a platform back in 2000 of public ownership, taxing the rich, scrapping tuition fees, a foreign policy based on human rights. He scrapped all of that, and his leadership campaign had no interest whatsoever in abiding by that. They wanted to dupe a left-wing membership and take power. So I guess I completely take what Milo's saying, and I've said it myself, which is, after that, to look at Andy Burnham's own trajectory, which was Blairite, kind of zigzagged around a bit. I'm not saying he may well have gone on an authentic political journey. There are those who say he has because of experience in Manchester, but it would be unbelievably naive to suddenly lap up what he's saying uncritically, bearing in mind the experience with Keir Starmer. I mean, that point about foreign adventurism, by the way, is so important, because obviously Blairism was based abroad on sucking up to the United States uncritically. That's what led us to the killing fields of Iraq.
Still wants to do that now.
Well, but I mean, look, in his essay, he made it clear that we should have been more fully involved in the Iran war. Can you imagine? Yeah.
I mean, we should have let the bases be used.
Well, we should for offensive purposes. We already did allow them to be used, unfortunately. By the way, but you know, we had the Iraq war, blood and chaos. We had Afghanistan, where the Taliban ended up stronger than ever. In those, not only vast numbers of Afghans and Iraqis died, but hundreds of British service personnel as well. He wanted us to get involved in the war in Iran. You've got to look at that and think this man is incapable of learning anything. So what we'd have to know from Andy Burnham, because we haven't heard from foreign policy from him at all. He hasn't been scrutinised. I'd like to know what his position is on Iran, on Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. And we haven't had any media scrutiny of that whatsoever. And we need to know about that because a lot of the instability in the world, which people are very insecure about, comes a lot from that foreign adventurism.
Just on that, and obviously, and you know that the Israeli government will say it's not a genocide, so we won't go there, but yes, fine. But the point is this, Owen. Labour is at the moment losing votes on the right to reform, on the left to the Greens, right? And on the left to the Greens, partly it's because of a lot of foreign policy. Would you agree? And to the Gaza independence as well.
Well, I mean, by the way, the way you made it sound there is as though it was kind of both equally losing to the Greens and reform.
How do you see it?
Well, the statistics that show that they're losing about 4 times as many to the Green Party as they are to Reform. And, you know, even in those seats in the local elections where they lost to Reform, some of that was because some people voted for the Greens in smaller towns, and that allowed Reform to come through the middle. But if you look at across the country, I mean, you know, in big urban areas, the Greens are replacing Labour as a political force. You can see that in London. You can see that in all places, in Hastings, you know, where they won the council. So I think there's it's twofold. I think it's the economic model, which, because a lot of the people who are going to the Greens are, I'm a geriatric millennial, I'm 41 years old, they're millennials and Gen Z. I mean, millennials used to be a byword for youth, but the oldest now about 45. But these are people who, you know, have gone through a housing crisis where property ownership has come out of reach, where social housing has been flogged off, where they're in an unregulated private rented sector, where their work is often insecure, and their wages have stagnated. And they've seen a foreign policy which they've been told by the grown-ups in the room that this is what we've got to stand in the United States. And they've seen over and over again that's been a catastrophe. So it's both. I think it's the economic, it's the elites having been discredited on the economy and on foreign policy.
It's some of the stuff that you talked about in Chavs and the Establishment all those years ago. Your prescription has sort of come to pass. Milo, good to talk to you. Thank you. Ian in West Drayton. Ian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ali. I'd just like to ask Owen, I mean, I think we touched on it a bit about the message and the messenger in that Tony Blair is compromised, but it's setting aside the foreign adventure disasters of the Blair years. I think the trouble with Blair is he's now very much a spokesman for the billionaire and millionaire classes. He has a vast property portfolio. His think tank is one of the most best funded, certainly in Britain, if not in Europe. You know, it's very much on that American model. And he's probably the richest ex-prime minister post his position since perhaps the Duke of Devonshire in the 18th century.
So I think, but that doesn't mean what he's saying is necessarily not.
No, but it undermines it, Ali, because if Bernie Madoff could give you the best financial advice in the world, you'd be suspicious to take it because it's Bernie Madoff giving it to you.
Okay, just on that, Ian.
What you're saying is completely spot on. Look, I mean, the Tony Blair Institute has received millions of pounds from brutal, murderous dictators like the Saudi regime. After Khashoggi was chopped to pieces in the embassy, the Saudi embassy in Turkey, he continued.
Jamal Khashoggi, the
Saudi dissident journalist who was murdered by the Saudi regime. But you know, this is a Saudi dictatorship which beheads people, which brutalises people who are gay, which slaughtered people in Yemen, and he received millions again from Kazakhstan. I mean, these awful regimes. More to the point, and I think this is what was your name again? Ian. Spot on. Look, AI. We didn't even mention artificial intelligence. It was
that's one of the big things he talks about.
One of the big things he talks about, and you know, he's received, and I've got the figures here from Larry Ellison. This is the founder of Oracle, at the absolute epicenter of artificial intelligence. He's received $130 million in the Tony Blair Institute between 2021 and 2023, and then another $218 million pledged in. You can't then say, if he's calling for, artificial intelligence being at the centre of everything, you can't then divorce that from the vast sums he's getting.
I understand that point. I do understand it, but he's saying, look, and you would say that he would say this, I'm not in hock to the tech bros. I've been bought off by the tech bros, right?
That's just bankrolled by them.
Fine. But he's also saying, and he said earlier this week, there are two epochal challenges happening in the world today. One is geopolitical, the other technological. Now, on AI, whether you agree with them or not, because who he's funding him, it is going to be a massive, massive impact on jobs, the economy, and reimagining everything we do.
You're right, but look, again, this shows how he won't learn from his own mistakes, because what he would talk about in the noughties is how globalisation is just a fact of life. It's like complaining about the weather, suck it up. And the problem with that is huge numbers of people got angry about it, and it's now fallen apart, essentially. It's falling apart all around us. With AI, no one's saying that AI should be, very few, should be stopped or rolled back or anything like that. The question with technological development is it in whose interests is it is it rolled out?
Okay.
And the problem at the moment is it's in the hands of tech bros who do not have the interests of ordinary people at heart. And we need to have regulation to make sure that artificial intelligence benefits people rather than causing huge problems.
Okay, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I think Owen's making very valid points. And again, I studied history, as I think Owen did. And you look back at when you first, gas supplies, municipal socialism of Joe Chamberlain in Birmingham. It wasn't just passing it out to a private company. That was done in the nature of the business. And it's the same with other things. When car manufacture came in, we just didn't say, there's Ford, we don't need to have our own car industry. And I think, to be fair to Blair, I think that a lot of our political class is totally compromised. It's not a party politics. George Osborne, I believe, works for ChatGPT. There's too many people talking up their own books. And this is what undermines politics. Blair can't go there and present himself. And it has got worse. Owen very rightly mentioned Harold Wilson. And so when Harold Wilson died, he died in relative poverty. He had to go to shuffle in the House of Lords when he had Alzheimer's to pay the bills. And another thing, the difference between Harold Wilson and Tony Blair, despite all the pressures on him, he didn't get us involved in Vietnam. There aren't Vietnam vets in Britain suffering post-traumatic disorder like there was in America. Whereas Blair would have been there sending the Brigade of Guards in.
Well, I think on foreign policy, I agree with you, and Owen, to be honest, that it is difficult to take lessons from Tony Blair on foreign policy given the history. But look, he's entitled to his view. And on the AI thing, I fully understand exactly what people will say about the fact that he's in hock to the tech bros because of who he gets financing from and all the rest of it. I do think we do need to have a proper, deep conversation about the economic and social implications of the AI revolution, which none of us can actually control.
But you're right, but it shouldn't be led by people who are literally funded and linked to AI. And the problem we've got at the moment is we've got AI is a vast, huge industry. They're very well resourced, and they will make their case in a way that those who are critical don't have the same position and platform. Look, my mum is an AI academic, now retired. So look, I understand artificial intelligence has its, it's not something that's going to disappear or vanish, but it has to be managed and regulated, and that's not what Tony Blair's arguing for.
Understood. Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? Ali Miraj on LBC in conversation with Owen Jones. It's 12:34. Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? That is the big conversation that we need to have. And I'm glad that Tony Blair started it, because we need a serious debate around policy direction, not just a tinkering around with personalities at the top of the Labour Party if we are to make any progress. Your thoughts? 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. This is being live streamed on YouTube and Global Player. Get involved, please. Joy in Streatham, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ali, and good afternoon, Owen.
Hey, Joy.
Owen. Hi. I happen to be one of those people who absolutely love a lot of what you say.
Oh, now, bless. There's one or two of you. That's my lot.
You're welcome, especially on the internet. Now, Tony Blair, please let me say what I need to say. Tony Blair is nothing but a scum of the earth, and I'm speaking as someone who voted. When he got into power 3 times, I'm one of those voters who encouraged my whole community, because I used to run the TRA, encouraged my son's generation, his friends. When I say I would approach people on the street, have you voted? Make sure you vote. I'm one of those people who egged it on. So when Tony Blair, when you think about it, I'm glad Owen made that point. What he says in terms of this piece, I agree with a lot of what he said. But the fact that this man still has not apologized for taking us to war, we're still suffering the consequences, wants us, thinks we should have gone into Iran and attacked Iran. He's part of the board of peace, which is not board of peace, it's board of war. So could you tell me what has he done so far that actually shows that he cares about us and our country?
Joy, just on this point, are you saying that because of his debacle in Iraq, and I agree with you on that anything else he says is rendered redundant and irrelevant because of that? Do you think so? Yes or no, Joy?
Yes, because it makes no sense. He's contradicting his own comments. When he says we should be at war with Iran, how would we benefit from a lot of what he's saying?
Understood.
But also, I don't think we should look at Iraq as, oh, whoops, silly old me. We've all got our foibles. Who hasn't accidentally, illegally invaded a country and
He's never
killed
going to
hundreds?
admit it, Owen, is he? He's never going to admit that the fact that he basically was in hot with George W. Bush and he was shoulder to shoulder, and he would say, look, I did it in the best interest. It didn't work out the way I wanted it.
We should admit what he did. If he will never admit what he did, because he is the criminal at the crime scene, okay? As Kofi Annan, the then UN General Secretary, pointed out, it was an illegal war because it violated the UN Charter. It was a criminal act. It's not an act... you can look at some policies that a government introduces and say, well, look, that didn't work out, that was bad, whatever, that's politics. I don't think invading a country... I went to Baghdad a few months ago, and people came up to me, and when they found out I was British, said, you destroyed this country. And I saw all over the streets the faces of young men who'd been blown apart in that war over 20 years. That country, the sectarian bloodbath that the coalition occupation unfortunately helped unleash, but the slaughter that people endured and the breakdown of society, that's not something you say, well, we all make mistakes. It was a crime. And you say, well, does that mean everything else is null and void? Yes, actually, if I'm honest. I think if you look at other foreign leaders, if it wasn't a Western state, if they invaded a country illegally, like Vladimir Putin, you don't go, well, he did a bad thing there, but let's look at the good things he's done.
It's an interesting point. Joy, thank you for picking up the phone and making it. Roland in Chelsea. Roland, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm fed up listening to Red Owen and how he and his type is just pulling this country down into the gutter. I've just come back from the US of A, where I attended a conference of young school kids, over 6,000 schools in America, put forward children to come up with ideas to build businesses and make money. And in this country, the politics of envy and the people like Owen who spit out this inaccurate trash is making me
Which
sick.
Inaccurate trash,
and I'm
Roland?
fed up with LBC giving a platform to people like this.
But Roland, just on one thing, and we'll come back in a second. Just on the platform point, look, Owen's a man of the left. He's a considered, thoughtful man of the left. He's not a member of the Labour Party. He's got views on this. I've got views on this. We all do. And if we're going to make any progress, we need to have a robust conversation with each other. And I'm glad you've raised your point. Now, Roland.
I admire Roland's passion. I admire it greatly. I think...
He's talking about wealth creation, which is a fair point.
I think the 2 points I'd make is, look, Thatcherism in the 1980s did privatisation, slashed taxes on the rich, smashed the trade unions, all of those things. And the point I would make, Roland, is economic growth ever since has been lower than it was in the heyday of, the post-war settlement of nationalisation and high tax on the rich, and less equitably distributed. And the second point I'd make, Roland, is, look, you might not like my views. Look, lots of people don't. That's fine. That's, that's democracy and all the rest of it. But, you've got to accept, if you look at the polling, most people in this country do think richer people should pay more taxes. They do support public ownership of utilities and services. I mean, you spoke as I'm running the country. Red Owen is bringing the country down. But the point is actually people like myself politically have been completely marginalised. I have no power or influence in this country whatsoever. We've had your policies. The sort of policies you support are the policies, in my view, that have led this country into low economic growth, stagnating living standards, low productivity, and all the other crises that we're not addressing.
Owen, can I just ask you this? On the tax point, right, and we've also got to bring in welfare spending here. I mean, if you tax people, and it will always fall on the middle class more, if you tax people, the tax burden's already 36%, right, one of the highest since the Second World War. I mean, how much more can you actually squeeze the cow?
Well, I mean, the tax burden is the question of the tax burden is whose shoulders does it fall?
Yes.
And obviously, taxes, if you look at corporation tax or income tax, then they have been massively slashed from where they were in the 1970s. The issue, you mentioned welfare spending, that as a share of the economy, it's not gone up in the last few years. It's going up in numbers, as you would expect.
Yes.
We have an ageing population. Most welfare spending goes on pensioners, as you would expect.
1,000 people signing on for PIP every day.
Well, I mean, we've got people who are being rejected from disability benefits, who have been, who have lost their arms and legs, who have terminal cancer, who have all sorts of very serious multiple sclerosis. People with very serious conditions aren't getting disability benefits in this country, as a matter of fact. But the issue is, if we want to reduce welfare spending in other ways, let's look at the fact that we flogged off council housing. 4 in 10 of those council homes are now rented out by private landlords.
That I think is a good point.
But then we're subsidising with housing benefits.
That I think is a fair point.
But again,
we didn't replenish. We did not replenish.
In work benefits as well. Okay. We're not paying people proper wages. Okay. So we can reduce welfare spending if we sort out housing and wages.
Understood. Roland, very quick comment from you.
All I want to say is that sort of monologue, that ramble, makes young people sick to the stomach and absolutely turns them against any idea of starting a business. And I work with small companies, and I work with individuals. I mentor them. I work with them. And when they hear this stuff, they think this is not a country to try and do well in.
Well, I don't agree with that. I speak to young people. I like Red Owen, mate. Put that on my gravestone. But I don't think younger people. I speak to younger people all the time. The problem with younger people in this country at the moment is they can't get a secure home. They're often in 0-hour contract jobs.
Yes,
their wages are stagnating.
Okay.
Well, because you create the conditions of envy.
I understand.
I don't run the country, Roland. You're speaking as though I'm the Prime Minister.
Yes,
I don't have any power.
You love listening to your own voice.
I love listening to your voice as well.
Anybody else, you don't understand that this is a capitalist society, not a red society.
Okay, Roland. Well,
it's not a red society. You're right. I rest my case.
I mean, it's an interesting capitalist society when so much is also being spent on welfare. I mean, some people say that's a funny model of neoliberalism, including Tony Blair. Roland, thank you. Jane in Bishop Stortford. Jane, afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. May we bring back this manifesto of, this thousands of words of Blair, and may we introduce in this dialogue the importance and the necessity for the government of the United Kingdom to legislate how we're going to ensure how AI is going to be correctly manifested for our purposes, because the titans and oligarchs will, by all means, have a complete and utter control such that the human autonomy will be markedly reduced over time, such that it will be diminished.
Okay, Jane, fair point. AI regulation.
Well, I mean, it's crucial, isn't it? I mean, look, AI obviously has its uses and its applications. The danger is that it will obviously destroy lots of jobs. And the question is, will it replace those jobs be replaced? Because if you take personal computers, when they arrived on the scene, lots of jobs were destroyed, but more jobs were replaced, replaced them because of personal computing. If we end up with a situation where ever greater numbers of our workforce are thrown on the scrap heap. I mean, you talk then about welfare spending. Well, obviously then the state will have to step in more and more as more and more people are driven from the workforce.
Who is talking about this? I mean, Blair and Burnham, I haven't heard any prescriptions. Now, it's very difficult to come out with policy mantras on this stuff, but I haven't even heard a debate going on about this. Have you? Really?
No, because largely it's just been a case of, people flying the flag for AI because, the people funded by AI people dominate the conversation.
There's going to be serious social disruption potentially on the back of this, and we need to be thinking very, very carefully as a country on how we actually deal with that, and also how we try and nurture some of our own AI champions in this country as well. Jane, thank you very much indeed. Andrew says this, hello Ali, what I like about Andy Burnham is that he finished the sentence, drive economic growth to enable more equitable social development. There is little incentive to work hard and bake a bigger cake unless we get a bigger slice of it. Andrew, thank you. Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? 0345 6060 973, text 84850. I'm in conversation with Owen Jones on LBC. It's 12:45. LBC 12:48. We're having this conversation. Is Blairism or Burnhamism the right path for the country? It's been quite a week on that front. Your thoughts? 0345 6060 973, text 84850. I'm in conversation with Owen Jones. A man of the left with an independent mind. John says this: Ali, this show is brilliant. It's uncommon to hear people find common ground these days. John, exactly. That's why I wanted Owen on, because we don't agree on everything, but it's important to hear different people with different views and try and find a way through towards a brighter future. Terry in Southgate, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ali and Owen. Nice to talk to you. This whole, the whole Andy Burnham being the shining light,
the Messiah,
the Messiah. I don't agree with his views. I think he can't really look after Manchester, let alone
Why, Terry? Come on, he's privatised the network. Sorry, publicised the network.
Anyone that's been to Manchester, if you've been to is it the Queen Square? The central part of Manchester. It's like a war zone. I mean, it's full of crack addicts, illegal immigrants.
I'm from Stockport. I'm a plastic northerner. I've given up my Mancunian heritage. I haven't given up Mancunian heritage, but I left a long time ago. I go back to Manchester a lot. I don't agree with that. I think there are criticisms to be made about the model based on property developers, because you've got this whole skyline now dominated by these big corporates, exactly.
What's wrong with that, then?
Yeah. Well, because there's a lack of affordable housing. You've got these big luxury flats, which aren't, the vast majority of Greater Mancunian people would not be able to afford to live in those flats. He made a commitment in 2024 when he was re-elected to build 10,000 council homes. Right. In the first year, do you know how many were built?
Tell me.
10 in Wigan. So there's an issue there, obviously.
But he did take the bus network public.
Well, so what he's done there, unfortunately, most of the bus services are still privately run. What he's done is bring it under a public control, because what Margaret Thatcher did is deregulate the buses in the 80s, and what that led to is surging ticket prices, but also a collapse in bus routes. In fact, they halved bus routes in this country. So that's obviously, we can, in London, people have had those regulated buses for a long time. It's integrated into one network. That's a good thing, but it's not the public ownership that I would want, though there are some public buses. But the issue, I think, about housing, I think, is really important, because we have a housing crisis nationally. If he ends up basically in bed with property developers on a national scale, in the way you could say in Manchester he doesn't have the power and control. I think that's what he might have argued.
Well, that's what he's
arguing on housing. In Westminster he would have that power. He's talking about council housing, but I don't agree. I mean, Manchester's a bustling dynamic city, which is very mixed. It's a friendly place. I know that's a cliche. I really don't buy this. I mean, rough sleeping, that was one of his commitments. That did go down in the first few years. It's gone up again. It's not as high as it was. I don't buy that. There are obviously people with challenges in Manchester. There's huge amounts of poverty, but it's not a dystopian hellscape.
Okay, Terry, thank you for your... Go and finish your point, Terry, quickly, go on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And as much as I don't think he'd be great, I would still pick him over the current Labour.
Why?
Because they're all used. I mean, they're floating Angela Rayner as a possibility. I mean, she's a tax fraud.
So is this a defensive?
She's not a tax fraud, by the way.
She was cleared, right?
They recently cleared her. I mean, come on, how stupid do you think the public is? Come on.
Okay, but Terry, is voting Burnham for you, if that comes to pass, would that be a defensive measure because you don't like anyone else?
Exactly that.
Okay, understood.
I mean, I'm quite a conservative person, but I would pick Burnham over any of the current Labour people.
All right, thank you, Terry. Appreciate your call. Marco, a first-time caller in Wakefield. Marco, thank you for picking up the phone. What would you like to say?
I think both Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer are both serving the same agenda, and we need a strong socialist leader.
Like who? Jeremy Corbyn?
Not Jeremy Corbyn. Who's the bloke after World War II that beat Winston Churchill?
Clement Attlee. Let's bring Clement Attlee back from the dead.
Yeah.
But Marco, what does socialism mean to you? Tell us.
I think socialism means to me basically for the people, and I think Labour over time with the new Labour and Tony Blair have shifted away from people to the super rich.
Okay, I understand, but just to press you a little bit more before I bring Owen back in, you're saying for the people, not for the super rich. What does that mean in theory? Because if you're going to serve the people, you need to have growth in the economy. You need to be able to generate growth to then even be able to redistribute that growth, don't you, Marco?
That's true, yes. But, like, when you think of, like, the World War II bloke, he brought in the NHS, which grew the economy because it was social care and, like, housing thingy.
Okay. I mean, you've touched on some of this stuff in the Establishment, your book, The Establishment, The Alternative as well. You give an alternative prescription. You've been thinking about these issues for a long, long time. What Marco's basically saying is this country is working for the elites, not for the people.
Well, I mean, if you look at the explosion of wealth at the very top of society and look at the stagnation of wages for the vast majority of people. Look, I mean, for millions of people are no longer better off than they were when the financial crash happened in 2008.
That's true.
And actually, even before that, in the years leading up to the crash, wages for the bottom half were either stagnating or actually declining. So we've got a big structural problem in the economy, which is, geared around the financial sector and property bubbles and speculation, which has not worked out well for most people. Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't want to go back to the 1960s, by the way. I know this is the caricature, but I would just note that is the decade after World War II when we had the most economic growth, and that's when we had nationalisation, very high taxes on the rich, and strong trade unions. So I think if we were going to argue that public ownership and taxing rich people properly and workers being able to organise to get a better share of the wealth they create is so bad for economic growth, then why in the 1960s did we have much better economic growth than we did now?
Well, it fell apart by the 1970s, though, Owen, wouldn't you say? When Margaret Thatcher came in.
Well, in the 1970s, we had two oil shocks, which
True.
I know it's a bit of déjà vu there for everyone, given we're going through that right now. True. But we had the oil shocks, and we had the Vietnam War, which led to the US economy overheating.
We also had the unions that were also sort of a drag on the economy, but we can agree to disagree potentially on that one. Marco, thank you for your call. Appreciate you picking up the phone for the first time. Eric in West Derby. Eric.
Hi. Right. Okay. I love Andy Burnham. I think he's a great guy.
Why?
Why? Because I think he's handled Manchester really well under the circumstances, but the reason I think that Starmer needs to still be in charge is because it wouldn't matter, short of getting Jesus Christ in charge of the country, the way the world is at the moment, we're no longer in Europe, are we? We're tied to that madman in the White House, for a start, and, we've got the problems with the straits in the Middle East. I don't think anyone could make a success at the moment. And I like Andy Burnham too much for him to take charge of a country where something could kick off and then, because things can't be done in 5 minutes, everyone goes to reform.
OK, Eric, hold that thought for a second, because I want to bring in another text question to you, Owen, on Burnham as well. Could you see Burnham doing any better to address the immigration disaster we have? I hate to give credit, but this current lot are doing OK at sorting out our borders, but surely we all want it to be better. Won't Burnham just open the doors to Sally and Taunton? Take it.
Well, I mean, I don't think we've had an immigration disaster. I know that lots of people disagree with me on that, and I would note actually that immigration levels, I think she alluded to that, to be fair, our net immigration is collapsing in this country.
It's going down significantly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what people are going to realise is they're not going to be any better off. Their wages aren't going to suddenly go up. They're not suddenly going to have, improved public services. I think we're going to have a reckoning, or I hope we have a reckoning, where we understand that the reason we have the problems we do is not because of immigrants who actually disproportionately come and work, pay, contribute. I mean, take, foreign students. I mean, they pay, £40 billion into our economy every year. And that's what the biggest single slice of immigration. I just think we constantly talk about this as, because the problem we've had in this country is we've allowed governments to not fund our public services. We've allowed rich people to not pay their taxes properly, and yet what we do is we focus on immigration rather than address the actual issues, and that causes the problem.
Let me press you on this, because I'm not saying that there are not people out there who blame immigrants for their lot economically or their lack of a lot economically. I understand that point. But I personally think that's too seductive when it ignores other elements as well which are cultural. It's not just about economics. Do you see that, or do you think that it is all about economics and the cultural thing is just culture wars being stoked up by the right? Because I fear that if we go down that road, we're missing half the point here.
Well, I mean, I think that is unpacking, you know.
Yeah, it gives me sleepless nights, though, genuinely, because I do feel it culturally, Owen. I genuinely do. And when I see people walking in the United Kingdom marches, I'm not saying that it doesn't contain racist people. I'm sure they do. But when I see families going out with their kids and I ask them, why are you doing this? I go, I want my country back. And you're thinking, this isn't just about economics, it's about culture.
I get that, but if I'm honest, a lot of those people who often feel that are often in the areas with the least immigration. Because if you look at actually places like London, which is obviously one of the most diverse cities on the face of the earth, those sentiments tend to be much lower. You know, I often get people tweeting at me going, you know, Owen, yeah, as a gay man, go to Tower Hamlets. I used to live in Tower Hamlets, you know, because they say Tower Hamlets because it's a large...
But I'm there too, but Owen, sometimes it does look like downtown Kabul to a lot of people.
Well,
it does. There are lots of people walking around, and I'm not saying that I want to interfere with what people wear, but there are lots of people walking around with niqabs in the place. And people
I mean, the statistics of that is a very, very small... There's 4 million Muslims in this country. The number of people who wear... It's up to women what they wear, obviously, but who wear a niqab is we're talking a few thousand people. It's a tiny, tiny percentage of Muslims.
Maybe people don't want their area to become like that. Maybe that's the argument.
Well, people obviously should just dress how they wish, obviously, but the point I would make about Tower Hamlets is quite interesting because Tower Hamlets has one of the biggest Muslim populations in London and one of the biggest gay populations in London. You have, you know, gay bars and then you have people go to mosques.
Coming to Shoreditch where I DJ.
Well, there we go. But I'd love to see you DJ, by the way. But I mean, that's the thing. But the point I'm making is it works. It's not perfect. People have conflicts. People have misunderstandings. People have tensions. Of course, that's true. But I actually think, you know, give London and give actually diverse places in this country more credit. I grew up in Stockport, which was quite homogeneously white. You know, I grew up near the centre of Stockport, and yes, it's like a different world from where I now live in London. But I often find that people's frustrations or fears about immigration are often in places with the least immigration. That's often the case. And I think when you end up mixing with people from different backgrounds, those misunderstandings and those fears reduce quite dramatically.
Well, I tell you, the mixing that we've had between Owen and myself has certainly also reduced misunderstandings, I hope, out there. Look, Owen, we've had too many calls. We've run out of time. Can I ask you to come back again, Owen, at some point?
I would love to come back.
It's been really important to have you here to sort of dissect some of this stuff because it's important. None of us have the answers. We've all got to put our collective heads together if we're going to make our country better. And I'm very grateful for you taking out the time on your Sunday. Really good to have you.
We need some, humility. You're right. We don't all have the answers. And this has really helped clarify my thinking. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Owen. Really, really good of you. Thank you to everyone on that one. Now, coming up, and the BBC has been hit with allegations of bias following claims that Nigel Farage has been banned from appearing on desert island discs as his presence would make corporation staff feel unsafe. Now, clearly the BBC have not come out and said that that's the case at all, that they would potentially look at if he wanted to get involved in a future date. They're open to having that discussion. But he has been in frontline politics for the last 30-odd years and not been invited on. And it just points to this broader thing when it comes to Nigel Farage, who's not everyone's cup of tea. I will accept that. Bringing me to this question, which I want to put to you as follows. Is the establishment institutionally biased against Nigel Farage?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, a government minister has backed calls for an inquiry into the SNP after its former chief executive pleaded